Did you know that Mount Everest wasn't always considered the highest mountain on Earth? For most of history, people had no idea what the tallest peak really was. Different civilizations, explorers, and empires each believed a different mountain held the crown, sometimes because it was sacred, sometimes because it simply looked tallest, and sometimes because it was the only one they had ever seen. This is the story of the mountains that were once believed to be the tallest in the world, before Everest took the title for good. Long before people could measure mountains, they could only imagine them, and for most of history, the tallest mountain in the world was simply the one they could see. If you lived in ancient Greece, that mountain was Olympus, 2,918 meters, or 9,573 feet high. It wasn't the tallest by modern standards, but it was the tallest in Greece, and that made it the home of the gods. Zeus ruled from its summit. No one climbed it, no one needed to. Olympus was sacred, and if it touched the heavens, what else could possibly be taller? Later, the Greeks started to travel. Reaching the Atlas Mountains in today's Morocco, they started to realize that there must be another way to the sky besides Olympus. Atlas Mountains go higher than 4,000 meters. Greeks believed that this mountain range had once been a titan who held the sky on his shoulders until he got transformed into stone upon seeing the head of Medusa the Gorgon. In ancient Persia, the legendary cosmic mountain Hara Berizaiti was said to connect heaven and earth. A real-world candidate for this myth was likely Mount Damavand, the tallest peak in modern-day Iran, standing at 5,610 meters, or 18,406 feet. It was feared, worshipped, and seen as the source of divine winds. To people of the time, this made perfect sense. If a mountain shaped the weather, towered above the clouds, and no one could climb it, wasn't it obviously the highest? For early Christians, the highest mountain in the world was Mount Ararat in the Armenian highlands. At 5,137 meters, it was widely believed to be the place where Noah's Ark came to rest after the Great Flood. According to the Bible, when the waters receded, the Ark stopped at a mountain. And since Ararat was the tallest known in the region, it became the default location. By the 18th century, European expeditions were being sent to Ararat to search for remnants of the Ark. Nothing was ever found, but even into the 2000s, both the Pope and the Patriarch of Moscow publicly referred to Ararat as the Ark's final resting place. Another contender was Mount Teide, a volcanic peak in the Canary Islands. It stands 3,718 meters high, or around 12,200 feet. Not extreme by global standards, but because it rises directly from sea level, it looks far taller than it actually is. Sailors approaching from the Atlantic could see it from great distances. In the 15th century, a Venetian traveler estimated its height at 90 kilometers, or around 56 miles. An enormous exaggeration, but one that reflected how imposing it seemed from the ocean. Everything changed in 1526 when the Spanish conquistador Bartolomé Ruiz landed on the coast of what is now Ecuador. There, rising alone above the clouds, was a vast glaciated volcano unlike anything seen in Europe or the Mediterranean. It was called Chimborazo, and for the next 3 centuries it would be known as the tallest mountain in the world. Chimborazo, in central Ecuador, rises 6,310 meters, or 20,703 feet, above sea level. It's not the highest mountain in the Andes. It's not even in the top 30 by elevation, but for nearly 300 years it was considered the tallest mountain in the world. Spanish explorers arriving on the Pacific coast in the early 1500s could see it from over 140 kilometers away. Its profile is massive, glaciated, and completely isolated, standing alone with no other peaks nearby to compete with it visually. At the time, Europeans had no data on the Himalaya, so when Bartolomé Ruiz and later Inca guides pointed to Chimborazo, it became the logical answer: this must be the highest point on Earth. By the 1700s, European geographers had fully adopted the idea. Chimborazo appeared at the top of altitude tables and encyclopedias. Its official height was estimated at over 6,300 meters, incredibly close to modern measurements, despite the lack of precise instruments. In 1802, the German naturalist Alexander von Humboldt led an expedition up the mountain. He and his team reached nearly 5,900 meters, or 19,356 feet, which, at the time, was the highest recorded altitude any human had ever reached. They were climbing into thin air with no oxygen, wool coats, and leather boots, and believed they were standing on the tallest mountain on the planet. They weren't, but they didn't know that yet. That would change just 6 years later, in 1808, when surveyors in India measured a peak far higher, one that would soon redefine the scale of what was possible. But Chimborazo still holds one title. Because of Earth's equatorial bulge, its summit is the farthest point from the planet's center, even farther than Everest. By elevation, it lost its crown. But for nearly 3 centuries, Chimborazo was the highest mountain known to the outside world, not because it actually was, but because it was the tallest anyone had ever measured. That would change just a few years later, not in the Andes, but half a world away. A new peak had been recorded deep in the Himalaya, surrounded by fortress-like ridges, hidden inside a valley that almost no outsider had entered. And for around 2 decades, it would take Chimborazo's place on every map. Nanda Devi rises 7,816 meters, or 25,643 feet, in the Garhwal Himalaya of northern India. Today, it's the second highest mountain in India and 23rd highest mountain in the world. But in the early 1800s, before Nepal was open to outsiders and before anyone had measured the central Himalaya, Nanda Devi was considered the tallest mountain in the world. British surveyors had only just begun charting the outer ranges, and among the peaks visible from British-controlled territory, Nanda Devi stood out immediately. Its summit was higher than any other the British could see or access, and it dominated every map they produced. Its official elevation, just over 25,600 feet, was remarkably accurate for the time. The mountain rises out of a vast natural basin, surrounded by steep ridgelines, a formation known as the Nanda Devi Sanctuary. Even today, it's one of the most remote and protected high mountain environments in the world. The peak itself stands completely alone, not buried in a cluster, but isolated, framed by rock and ice, towering over everything around it. From a surveying perspective, that made it hard to ignore. It was clean, distinct, and measurable, exactly the kind of mountain that stands out in early triangulation work. And for a few years, it sat unchallenged at the top of global altitude records. But it wasn't just the numbers that gave it importance. Nanda Devi has long held deep cultural significance. The mountain is named for a local manifestation of the goddess Parvati, and in many villages surrounding the region, she's still worshipped as a protector. Annual pilgrimages circle the peak, and climbers who have reached its summit often describe a sense of reverence that goes beyond the altitude. Eventually, Nanda Devi would be overtaken by peaks farther north. But for a brief window in history, before survey teams reached the higher ranges, this was the roof of the world. That changed in 1808, when a new peak was recorded deep in what's now western Nepal, a peak that shattered previous records. And for the first time in history, a mountain was confirmed to rise above 8,000 meters. Dhaulagiri stands 8,167 meters, or 26,795 feet, above sea level in western Nepal. It's the 7th highest mountain in the world today, but in 1808, it became the highest mountain ever recorded by human survey. That year, British surveyors working from across the Indian border measured its elevation. It came back higher than Nanda Devi, and higher than any mountain ever charted. From that moment forward, Dhaulagiri replaced Nanda Devi at the top of official records. It became the new standard, the highest mountain known to the world. Dhaulagiri is an enormous, heavily glaciated massif. Its name means white mountain in Sanskrit, and it rises abruptly from the Kali Gandaki Valley below, forming one of the most dramatic local elevation gains anywhere in the Himalaya. It appeared on maps, in encyclopedias, and in school atlases across Europe and Asia as the tallest peak on Earth. And it kept that title for 30 years, longer than Nanda Devi, but eventually overtaken by something even higher. Unlike Everest or Annapurna, Dhaulagiri saw almost no serious climbing activity until the 1950s. It was remote, heavily crevassed, and not part of the early wave of expeditions. Its first successful ascent didn't happen until 1960, when a joint Swiss-Austrian team reached the summit with the help of airdrop supplies from a fixed-wing aircraft, a rare tactic at the time. Since then, it's remained one of the less climbed 8,000-meter peaks. Dhaulagiri doesn't have the name recognition of Everest or K2, but it's consistently ranked among the most avalanche-prone and technically demanding in the range. It may have lost its place at the top, but for 3 full decades, Dhaulagiri stood as the world's highest recorded point, and the first time the known ceiling of Earth's elevation crossed 8,000 meters. By the late 1830s, survey teams had pushed farther east. New instruments, new sightlines, and new access revealed a peak that exceeded even Dhaulagiri. It was taller, broader, and unmistakably higher, the next clear shift in what the world thought was possible. Kangchenjunga stands 8,586 meters, or 28,169 feet, on the border between Nepal and the Indian state of Sikkim. It's the 3rd highest mountain in the world today, but in the mid-19th century it held a different title, the highest mountain ever measured. By the late 1830s, the Great Trigonometrical Survey of India had advanced eastward, deep into the Himalaya. Using theodolites, chains, and sightlines over hundreds of kilometers, surveyors recorded new elevations never seen before. Among the peaks they identified, one stood clearly above the rest: Kangchenjunga. Its name means the 5 treasures of snow, referring to its 5 distinct summits. The highest of those towers above the surrounding landscape, and when first measured, it surpassed Dhaulagiri by nearly 1,400 feet. From 1838 to 1852, Kangchenjunga was officially the highest mountain known to science. Its height, 28,169 feet, was astonishing for the time. It appeared at the top of all official charts, atlases, and government reports. But its reign was relatively short. In 1852, a Bengali mathematician named Radhanath Sikdar, working with the Survey of India, analyzed data on a new, previously overlooked peak farther north. It had been labeled simply Peak 15, and once the numbers were checked and rechecked, it became clear Peak 15 was even higher than Kangchenjunga. Today, the mountain remains sacred in Sikkimese tradition. Climbers who summit often stop just a few meters below the top out of respect, a gesture that continues to this day. And while it no longer holds the record, Kangchenjunga marked a turning point in exploration, the moment when altitude crossed into a new frontier, and the race for the roof of the world moved north once again. By the early 1850s, survey teams had recorded a distant, unnamed peak farther north. It was labeled Peak 15, one of many entries in the growing list of Himalayan summits. The calculations were rechecked multiple times, and when the final result was accepted, Peak 15 was revealed to be the highest mountain on Earth. That mountain would later be named Mount Everest. It stands 8,848 meters, or 29,032 feet, above sea level, and it has remained the world's highest point ever since. The man responsible for the discovery was Radhanath Sikdar, a mathematician from Bengal, working as part of the Great Trigonometrical Survey of India. He analyzed the measurements and was the first to recognize Everest's true height, even though the mountain lay more than 150 miles from where it was observed. Despite the significance of the finding, the information wasn't made public immediately. The survey team spent 4 more years verifying the data, and it wasn't until 1856 that Everest was officially declared the highest mountain in the world. The mountain was named Everest after George Everest, the former Surveyor General of India, despite the fact that Everest himself had never seen the peak and had argued against naming it after him. Locally, it was already known as Chomolungma in Tibetan and Sagarmatha in Nepali, but those names were not adopted by the British survey team. For the next century, Everest remained a theoretical summit. It was visible, measurable, but unclimbed. Many attempts were made, mostly from the Tibetan side, beginning in the 1920s, but all of them failed. It wasn't until 1953 that the summit was finally reached, when Tenzing Norgay and Edmund Hillary stood at the top during a British expedition led by John Hunt. Their climb became one of the defining achievements of the 20th century exploration. Since then, Everest has become both a symbol and a battleground, the subject of fascination, ambition, controversy, and crowding. Hundreds now climb it each season. But for all that's changed, its position as the highest has not. In 2020, Nepal and China jointly confirmed its updated elevation: 8,848.86 meters, or 29,032 feet. No other mountain has surpassed it. But more than a century later, a new measurement raised an unexpected possibility that Everest might not be number one after all. One mountain, far to the northwest, briefly challenged that position. You might be wondering why we're in the Karakoram. After all, K2 was never considered the highest mountain in the world. But in 1986, that nearly changed. A team of Italian scientists conducted a remeasurement of K2 using satellite-based geodesy. Their initial results suggested something no one expected, that K2 might actually be taller than Everest, possibly by as much as 11 meters or little over 36 feet. The claim circulated quickly. Newspapers picked it up, climbers debated it, and for the first time in over a century, Everest's title looked uncertain. But it didn't last long. Follow-up surveys using GPS and refined satellite data confirmed Everest's lead. The 1986 reading was eventually dismissed, likely the result of atmospheric distortion or instrument error. Still, for a brief moment, K2, the second highest and arguably one of the most dangerous mountains on Earth, came closer than any peak in history to dethroning Everest. Mount Everest remains the highest mountain above sea level, but depending on how you define highest, the answer isn't always the same. Measured from the center of the Earth, Chimborazo is technically farther from the planet's core. Denali in Alaska has the greatest elevation gain from base to summit on land, and if you measure from the ocean floor, the tallest mountain in the world is actually Mauna Kea in Hawaii, but those are stories for another time. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. It helps me a lot. Let me know in the comments which mountain surprised you the most, and if you haven't seen it already, check out my video about the mountains that have only been climbed once. Thanks for watching.